Okay, let's start. Good morning. This is the Gardener community meeting. Today we have 4 topics. First, Raphael will talk about the Gardener seed admission controller. Then we have Sayak from Bees Labs. He will first talk about heading first into Gardener, and then about his contribution he's working on. Cloudflare support for external DNS controller. And finally, we have Ismail with Protobuf definitions for API resources. So Raphael, if you're ready, you can take over.
Yeah, hello.
Hi.
Okay, let me share. I will give a very short demo of the seed admission controller that we have developed the past 2 weeks. So the motivation is, or was, that we have a lot of extension CIDs in the seed clusters that contain crucial state and also have crucial control over the shoot clusters. For example, we have infrastructure custom resource definition, which whose reconciliation will create networks and so on. And losing this infrastructure would be a tremendous outage that would not be easy to recover from. And also, would lead to availability problems of the shoot, of course. Do you still hear me, by the way? Because
Yes.
it seems that the screen. Okay.
Yes.
Good. So what the seed admission controller is doing, it's preventing this deletion of the infrastructures if it was not previously confirmed with an extra step. Way similar to the shoot deletion prevention or project deletion prevention in the garden cluster, where the user has to first annotate the object with a confirmation annotation, and only then the delete call is accepted. And this is mainly to protect these resources from being accidentally deleted, of course, with the same motivation like we have done it for the shoot in the past. And we'll quickly demo it. So I have 2 infrastructures of 2 shoots here. And I have the AWS controller running, and here in this pane, the seed admission controller. And I will now apply the validation webhook configuration. We can take a look at it. It is reacting on delete operations for the resources in our extensions API group. Not all of them, but most of them that are worth to protect. And it's also reacting on delete requests for the custom resource definition. Because even worse, if you would delete the infrastructure custom resource definition itself, the Kubernetes controllers will go ahead and will transitively also delete all the infrastructure instances, which would mean the loss of the infrastructures of the whole seed cluster. Okay, so we have applied it, which means that I should now not be able to delete an infrastructure because I have not previously confirmed it. I think that's the name. I triggered the deletion, and the webhook told me that I have to first annotate it. Like this, and now I should be able to start the deletion, and only then the delete call will be accepted. And maybe as an example of the worst case, I will delete again the validation webhook configuration. So no seed admission controller is acting now. And if I now delete the custom resource definition of the infrastructures. We should also see, we only have this one, but as explained, all of them that are still existing in the cluster would be deleted. So this would mean the loss of the infrastructures and very hard to recover state. Okay, so that's mainly it, what the seed admission controller is doing for now. But yeah, we might also extend it in the future to even do more things, maybe protect other things or implement admission decisions for other operations. Okay, do you have questions?
Seems not to be the
So
case.
it's not yet released in the v1.2, but it will then come with the next release. It's just that you are aware when it's coming out. Okay.
That's all done by the seed controller, correct?
Sorry?
So the deployment of these webhooks is done by the seed controller?
Yes.
Okay.
Right. So the Gardenlet has the seed controller, and as part of the bootstrapping phase of the seed cluster, the deployment as well as the webhook is created.
And that's also reconciled?
Yep. Also for the machine objects, so the machine CIDs themselves are protected from deletion. The machine objects, so the instances of the CID, they are not protected because the machine controller manager still has to dynamically add and remove machine objects, for example, when it's doing a rolling update. And we didn't want, at least for now, in the first version, to build this logic also in the machine controller that it previously annotates the object. So only the CID definition. Sorry, got dropped out. But I'm basically done, so.
Okay, thanks, Raphael. There was some problem with the meeting right now.
Yeah, sorry. I have some internet instability still.
Yeah, many people are doing video conferences these days. Thanks, Raphael. Then we can go to Sayak. He's from Bees Labs. So welcome in the Gardener community, and we're curious to see what you're doing with Gardener.
Hi there.
Hi, Sayak.
So let me start by sharing my screen. Okay, so let me introduce myself a bit. I am Sayak Mukhopadhyay. We are from Bees Labs, and we are a small startup based in Chennai, India. And I'm working as a senior product developer and as a co-founder in that startup. And I work in all sorts of technologies, front end, back end, pretty much whatever needs to be done that day, essentially. So I have dipped my hands in a lot of things, but most of the things that I've done till now have been all on-premise based technologies. I haven't really worked on the cloud apart from deploying, say, a Node.js app on a VM or a Spring Boot app on another VM. So what happened was that if I go to our startups use case, so what we are doing is that we are making a product. It's an intelligent automation platform that we are creating, which can help enterprises automate their day-to-day activities. And the differentiator for us is that unlike other automation suites that are available in the market nowadays, we have a very centralized approach to managing and controlling things. As such, we have a very centralized dashboard, and we have agents which can work on edge systems to execute the automations that are needed. And we are also very closely tied with the SAP ecosystem also, since we have come out from SP essentially. I mean, by SP I mean we were SAP developers. We were working at a big Indian MNC which provides services to companies worldwide, and we were working on providing SAP services. So what we understood was that there was a need to provide automation inside SAP, not from outside SAP by going through the screens one by one, but from inside SAP itself. So one of our differentiator is that. So while we were creating this product, we already had a vision that our product had to be future proof. So we knew that it had to be microservices at a level. We started by creating microservices for the main API server, the microservice for handling a queue, a microservice for handling some workflow logic, and but the idea was to deploy it on a single bare metal system at the end of the day, mostly on premise of the customer that we are going to have. And if we talk about technologies, it's mostly Java, although the edge systems can be of any technology. We have .NET based edge systems for Windows. We have, as we said, SAP ABAP based edge systems for SAP automations. We have even a Java itself can be used as a technology for an edge system. So that's how this product and this company is based upon. Now let us come to the problems and the challenges that we faced over the course of the last year as we were developing and as we were marketing our product. So one of the things that we realized very soon was that marketing a product which was an on-premise deployment was slow. So there was a lot of traction from the business side of the customers. Then came traction from the IT side of the customers. Then came traction from the current service providers, I mean IT service providers of the customers. So it delayed a lot of time, but the time that we could have saved going to other customers, spending more time on other more important things. Then we realized that there was this issue of maintenance and monitoring. Because we were deploying on premise, uh, whenever we needed to make a change, we had to make sure that all our jars had to be copied over to that system, pasted back. You know, the manual things that has to be done to maintain software over a period of time. And since we are also microservices based, it was not essentially maintaining a single jar. We're maintaining at least 4 or 5 different microservices, so it was taking time. And if after all of this, we had to make sure that we were working over VPN for the customer, and that VPN introduced extra delays and throttled our bandwidth, and there were lots of issues because of that. And the final problem that we knew that we would face, and we actually deployed keeping this in mind, and surprisingly the customer was not that unhappy with it, they were pretty forward with it, is that scaling. We knew that we had to scale vertically. There was no other option. And we said that, and the customer was like, okay, fine, we have systems, we will provide whatever. We need a 64 GB, 16 core server, okay, fine. But it was like, okay, we need to market it quickly. So we went forward with that. But we knew that this was not going to work in the long run. So we had to come up with a solution. And one of the plans, one of the instincts we always had was that we need to make this a cloud product. We need to move this to SaaS. We need to move our product Tulip to SaaS based offering. We need to make sure that the customers are subscribing to a product instead of deploying our product into their premise. So it would make our market time faster. We'll just need to say that this is how our product looks. You just subscribe to it, pay us whatever our cost is, and you're good to go. It would delete the middlemen of the customers. We won't need to go through IT and all of those things, since we are not deploying onto their premise anymore. And scaling. So the scaling thing will come very quickly to the next point that I will be talking about, that we had this idea that cloud means scaling. We can scale horizontally easily. So we started to look for solutions, like what is the current way to do these things. And what we came to learn was that Kubernetes was the de facto solution for cloud nowadays. And Kubernetes being an open source product, being backed by enterprises worldwide, was a big benefit for us. So we decided that okay, so Kubernetes it is. But as we went through Kubernetes, we understood that Kubernetes is essentially an API. It is essentially a management framework, and we really can't just use this for our day-to-day work. It will mean that we will be going back to our problem of maintaining and monitoring and all those things. So we needed something over that. We needed something over Kubernetes to work. And what happened was that since were working with SAP for a long time, we also were very conversant with the various products that SAP comes up with. We knew about HANA, we knew about SAP's cloud platform, and from there we came to know about Kima. So we learned about Kima and what it offers. We learned about its components, essentially that it's big components like Istio that it provides. And so what we realized was that yes, deploying Kima over Kubernetes can help us in maintaining our cluster way easier. But then came the question of that what happens if the customer doesn't want our cluster itself? What happens if the customer says that we have our own instance in Azure, we have our own instance in SAP Cloud Platform, and we want to deploy there? So we needed a way to handle multiple clusters. We need to handle our deployment across clusters. And from Kima themselves, we came to learn about Gardener, that Kima supports deploying on Gardener natively. And so we decided that okay, now next we need to look at what Gardener is and what Gardener provides. And least to say that we were very pleasantly surprised with the great offerings that Gardener did. many solutions that Gardener provided that unless we had to make do with ourselves. Like one of the things were that if we are having dashboards and stuff within Kubernetes, say as basic as the Kubernetes dashboard, and we need to access it via our own domain, that would mean we need to create our certificates. So if you want to create free certificates, you have to go Let's Encrypt. If you are using Let's Encrypt, it means 3-month renewal. Who is going to renew it? Who is going to remember it? So these are all issues that we were worried about initially, but Gardener has all of these sorted out already. They have their DNS controllers, they have their certificate controllers. So Gardener was an excellent choice. Also, we started to look into how we can use Gardener to our benefit to the fullest. And our experience with Gardener was mostly great. There were a few points. The great things were like its deployment was extremely easy. It's just a couple of commands and you're good to go. Deployment of Kima on Gardener is again pretty trivial. And Gardener provides a dashboard to see how clusters are managed, our clusters to some extent. As I said before, its DNS management was an added benefit. But there were a few points in Gardener that we were a bit hesitant about. Excuse me a moment. Okay, so one of the things were that the installer website that Gardener provides, it doesn't have all the zones of all the providers, although that can be easily mitigated by configuring your acre.yaml, and we don't see that as a big issue. But one of the big issues that we immediately recognized was that Gardener didn't support Cloudflare as a DNS manager. And we were using Cloudflare from the very beginning to have all our name servers on. So that was a first issue. But we came to realize soon after going through the Gardener source code that Gardener was, I mean, the components of Gardener were already extensible to some extent. They had interfaces, they had good examples already to how extend your components for your own use cases. So by virtue of that, I was able to extend Gardener's external DNS manager controller component for Cloudflare. But the other big problem that we know that we are going to face is upgrading it. Now, as you guys might have understood by now, that we are very new when it comes to Kubernetes. We are extremely new to this whole landscape. It's I've been pretty much working on it for the last 3 months. Yes, it's 3 months. I've been working on it for the last 3 months only, and I've understood that I've barely managed to scratch the surface of Kubernetes. So from my experience with the Gardener team, talking with them about this upgradation process, what I've come to know that it's a very hands-on manual process. And to be honest, I don't think anyone in our team is experienced enough, me included, to actually manage upgrading Gardener so that it stays up to date all the time. Another thing that I have realized, especially if I compare it to something like Kima, is that Kima has better documentation. I won't say Gardener lacks documentation, but I would say that Kima has better documentation, and one can take a idea from how Kima dumps down certain things for beginners. Gardener has mostly high level documentation, so it takes a while for me to understand some of the things that is present in the documentation. So, and with the current scenario, the current worldwide scenario, the current crisis that we are facing, it is inevitable that people will be figuring out the importance of cloud more now more than ever, and people will be rushing to cloud uh, in a record movement, I would say. So I think I have a hunch that there will be more and more people who will be trying to adopt Kubernetes, will be trying to adopt this open source frameworks, and they will be facing similar issues as to what we are facing. This is what I have a hunch in. So I would quickly like to wrap this up by saying that what we are uh, facing and what we have seen is that it is easy. It is easy to set up, but not easy to manage. Its extensibility is a huge plus point, and I thank you guys for making it so extensible, for being thinking forward, and knowing that people will be willing to come in and wanting to customize the tool to what their landscape wants. And I would like the documentation to be a bit more dumped down so that people can understand it better, since more and more people will be coming and adopting cloud, and they'll be coming from different levels of experience. So thanks for having me on this meeting. It was a great pleasure to connect with you guys both on Slack and on GitHub while I was working on that extension. Thank you all.
Thanks, Sayak. Are there questions?
Like you can ask any questions if you have any questions regarding our product, our company, anything.
Hi, Tim is here. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. So, and what clouds are you using? So, on what hyperscalers are you working on? So you said that you use Cloudflare for your DNS, but the clusters itself.
See, we are currently planning to go with Azure's Kubernetes service. So
Okay.
we are, I mean, we are the managed service we are planning to use, not their open source service, because as I said that we need a bit of handholding. That is sure, and we have been accepted by Microsoft's startup program. So we also have some support credits with them. So this is how our current scenario is, that we need a bit of handholding. We need to figure our way out through this whole new world, I would say. So we are using the managed Azure's Kubernetes service.
Okay, thank you. And also thanks for your contribution in the DNS controller.
You're most welcome. It is a privilege to work for open source, to be honest. Actually, our company, we have built upon open source, to be honest. We use a lot of open source products, and we want to contribute back to open source too. So it is a privilege to work with you guys.
Sayak, I have a few questions, if you please. So first of all, let me thank you for this deep dive, and it's always inspiring to hear from our customers. I believe the rest of the colleagues are feeling the same way too. So thank you for that. My question is, what's the scale of your company? Let me first say why I'm asking. What I'm wondering is how Gardener sits with, let's say, different types of companies and so on. So for you, for your scale of company, obviously it sits well. So just wanted to ask, what's the average size of the company and the business?
So currently, if you're talking about our company size, we are less than 30 employees right now. We have a single customer and maybe a couple of more in the pipeline. And technologically, as we were thinking that if you're asking me about how many clusters we were planning to build up, we are actually planning to build only 3 clusters. Essentially, we were planning to build 2 clusters, one cluster for development, testing and stuff, and the other one production, because since we have one customer, or maybe we'll have 2-3 customers in the coming year, I think that having a single cluster would be sufficient for that. So another cluster for dev and production, and if we are using Gardener, we'll probably need a garden cluster. So 3 clusters is what we are planning. So you can figure out that it's the minimal thing that we can use Gardener on. So that's our technological requirements.
Very good. Thank you very much for that. And another quick one is, or actually, let me let the stage to the rest of the colleagues. I don't want to steal the discussion.
So, hi, Sayak, this is Hardik. First of all, thanks a lot for using Gardener, and thanks a lot for coming here and presenting. So, and I understood from you that there is a scope of improvement in the documentation, right? And that's a valid point. I would not completely reject that. So, what would be really nice is that because you have already gone through a little bit of the hurdle, and I'm sure it's fresh enough with you, that there could be some scope, or there could be exact points where you would want to have a documentation to be better, right? So what could be very nice is that you could either create a small PRs where you think could be a little bit more documentation on your findings when you did something and you found something new and you want to add in documentation. That would be really nice to have it as a PR, or if not that, at least that would also be really nice if you could only create a GitHub issues specifying the exact bullet points, that a documentation on exactly on this question or that aspect of the Gardener would be really nice to have. So because I'm saying this because in general, what at least what I have observed is that documentation of any open source project depends a lot on the adoption, and only the fresh eyes like you are consuming with a very fresh eye. So only you can tell us very clearly that what exact would you want to see in the documentation. So just wanted to point this out.
Sure, Hardik. I can totally understand that, and I'll surely try to contribute something towards that.
Perfect. Thanks a lot.
Could you just in short summarize what was your incentive to start with Gardener and not, for example, use some public cloud hyperscaler Kubernetes service?
One of the things are that we don't want to get locked down to some provider. Although we say that we are using Azure Kubernetes service, we are using the bare bones of its offerings. We are not using we are not using things that we can get locked down into Azure, because we want our product to be available across cloud providers. As I said that we have customers who are in the SAP domain a lot. So we have customers who will probably have their own SAP cloud platform instances. And we don't want to have them come to Azure if they don't want to. So we wanted a agnostic controller. We wanted an agnostic cluster controller that could work across cloud providers, and which would not lock us to some technology already. So by that we came to know about Gardener. I mean, we came to know about Kima first. That's why that's how we came to know about Gardener. So that's how it is.
And how yeah, it's Adel here. And how did you come to know about Kima?
So we came to know about Kima from our other colleagues who are working on SAP, especially we were in touch with SAP labs in India, and they brought they brought up the existence of Kima to us, and from there on we started to look into it.
I see. Okay, thank you. Just one more question. You've mentioned that you're planning to use AKS. Are you also planning to like invest more or get to know Gardener more? And then I know that your company size now is small, but so what do you think, or what's your plan, for example, now? What do you plan to do with Gardener at this point in time? Do you plan, for example, to use it or experiment with it so that in the future you can use it instead, for example, of AKS, or what is your plan at the moment?
To be honest, our current plan is to use it because we are planning to go to cloud as soon as possible, because it is because on-premise is having some traction, as I mentioned. So our immediate plan is to go with Gardener on top of using Azure's Kubernetes service. And in the future, I don't think that we'll be changing this a lot. We might, as I said, we might use other cloud providers Kubernetes services alongside Azure's, but I'm pretty pleased with I'm personally pretty pleased with what Gardener offers, and I think we'll be using Gardener in the foreseeable future.
Nice.
Okay, thanks, Sayak. You have one more topic, if there are no more questions or comments to your presentation. Sayak?
Yeah.
You have a second topic,
Yeah, I
right?
guess right. I have a second topic. I was waiting if there was anybody to ask any question, but all right, I will.
So just go ahead. We can have even more questions after that.
Yep. I will share my screen again. Okay, so my next topic would be the contribution that I've done for the external DNS controller project. And the thing that was missing when we started to adopt Gardener was what was immediately visible, that there was no Cloudflare support. For example, when we were looking at Kima and other open source projects for certificate management, essentially, we looked at Cert Manager, and Cert Manager had a nice Cloudflare support for managing ACME certificates. So when we went to look at Gardener's thing, we saw that Cloudflare was missing, and I thought that well, let's see if I can just work on it. So one of the reasons why I think that Cloudflare should be pretty much useful for adding it to this landscape is that Cloudflare is a pretty popular service that people use for their reverse proxy and authoritative DNS services. And of course, our own name servers are located on Cloudflare. And Cloudflare has pretty good defenses against security threats like DDoS and other things. So we wanted to add Cloudflare support to this project. So one of the things that I immediately figured out was, and it is to my hindsight, was that after I talked with the Gardener team regarding my intention to contribute, I realized that it was in Go, and I had zero prior experience in Go. So I had to take up exactly. It's funny because I came into this Kubernetes world without having any knowledge of Go, and I pretty much looked at Kubernetes from a DevOps perspective. Didn't go through a lot of code, and this was the first time that I was seeing some code, and I saw, oh my god, it's Go, and I looked at every code out there for Kubernetes, and everything was in Go. And I was like, okay, so let's take a week to learn the basics of Go. So I spent around a week to learn the basics of what Go was all about. And let me take you. Can you guys see my screen,
Yes.
the ID?
Yes.
Okay. So after figuring out my way around Go, I started to work on an extension. So initially, how I was proceeding with the extension was that this extension, this project actually has a very nice interface for extending DNS providers. And my idea was that I will just extend this interface, maybe take in some ideas from existing controllers like Azure. Since we are using Azure, it was easy for me to test Azure and see if the same things are working with Cloudflare or not. So I started to work on the Cloudflare using the same ideas, but there was a big gap, and that gap was that Azure, Google, I think even what was that other thing? Was it OpenStack? I believe it was OpenStack. Oh, AWS. Yeah. They had this idea about resource groups. Essentially, you can update a certain set of DNS records at one time, which Cloudflare lacks. Essentially, if you want to add two IP addresses to a record in Cloudflare, you need to add two separate record items. Unlike in say Azure, wherein you can just add a single record, a record, and add as many IPs as you want to that record. So Cloudflare had a different way of doing things, and I somehow walked around things, did a bit of magic here and there to make the tests pass or something, and it was working. It was working okay, but then in my when I created GitHub PR, I think Krugov mentioned that he was actually working on something better, a different interface which would actually handle this exact use case, because this use case is already present in the Ali Cloud controller. And that new feature was the raw execution interface. And so I reworked my Cloudflare controller to work on that raw interface. So it's pretty simple. Cloudflare's API is actually pretty simple. Cloudflare has a Go SDK. The links I'll be providing to you. Although the Go SDK is not on its stable version, I would say it's still on 0.semver, but they're rapidly iterating over to make it compliant to their HTTP API. So the controller is pretty simple. We have interfaces, we have methods to list the zones. We have methods to list the records. One of the things in Cloudflare is that we can have API tokens as well as what is that called? An API key. So an API token is a standalone token that you can just use to use the Cloudflare API, and it is associated with your account. And the API, in an API token, you can add scopes, and you can restrict certain zones. You can restrict certain APIs and stuff. But an API key is an all access API key. So I took the option of using the API token as the only option for now. I am still keeping the idea of email and API key to be implemented in the future, but it is API token for now because it's inherently more secure. Since people can revoke it quicker, people can change the accesses incrementally. So with this addition of access, there is just one small thing that wants to be careful in the Cloudflare controller, and that is in the list zones. So whenever you're listing a zone in your Cloudflare, you can in your API key, you can make sure that certain zones are not writable. Now the problem with that is that even if you don't give access to a certain zone, when you're querying your zones, that zone will still come as a result. So so I had to make sure that there was some magic in list zones, which make sure that the zones which are only accessible to be worked on with the API token currently is actually added to the cache. So where was that? These zones. Yeah, got it. Results. See. Okay, so essentially what I'm doing here is that I am trying to get all the APIs out of this list zone results, and in that result I am trying to consume each of those using the consumer function and see that if I can access that zone or at that point of time or not. If I'm able to access, I'm doing it, okay, it's fine to go. But if I'm not able to access, I'm just leaving it out. So this, unlike Ali Cloud, is the only difference that is there for Cloudflare DNS. and the whole interface is pretty much the same as early cloud, and I believe that's it for the external DNS controller that I added for Cloudflare. So if you want to go through the repositories and the APIs, I have added those links into the PowerPoint that I'll be sharing. And thanks for letting me add something to this project.
Thanks for contributing.
Again, it was great to work and to learn.
Thanks a lot, Sayak. Any questions? Also to the previous presentation? Seems not to be the case. Then thanks again, Sayak. See you next time. And we have one more topic by Ismail.
Yep, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, let me share my screen. Okay, so basically I want to share with you the updates regarding the Protobuf definitions that we recently added to the Gardener. So small history, there is this issue that we hit, which was reported by Raphael. We saw that starting from Kubernetes version 1.16, the namespace controller in the kube-controller manager was not able to properly terminate the namespaces in the Garden cluster because our API resources were not implementing the Protobuf marshalling interface. Basically, there is no hard requirement that API resource needs to implement the Protobuf marshalling interface. So that's why we opened issue to Kubernetes. Here is my issue, and we basically managed to reproduce the same behavior with the sample API server. Here are detailed steps to reproduce, and you see that the same thing is reproducible also with the sample API resources. So basically, the root cause for this issue is that starting from 1.16, the controller manager is sending is configuring its client set with two content types in the accept header. So the first one is the content type for the Protobuf, and the second one is for application JSON. And the issue here is that the API server package coming from Kubernetes and that we use for our Garden API server is not properly able to fall back to the second content type in our case. That's basically reproducible with some curl requests if you send the not supported content type as first entry in the accept header, and the second one, the supported one. So the API server currently won't be able to switch to the supported one. So the good thing, this issue is still open, but the good thing is that Jordan Legit has a work in progress PR about it, but it's still not supported and it's still not merged. There are some failing tests. Also, as you know, 1.15 is running out of end of lifetime and basically I personally contacted Jordan and he said that it's quite tricky with cherry picks of such behavioral change PRs, which are not kind of regression. So that was our first motivation to add the Protobuf definitions to our API resources, and the second motivation is the benefits coming from this serialization format. So basically, that's the design proposal in CKPI machinery about protobufs, and there's some. It's actually a good reading, and you see that 90% of the requests are served by kubeAPI servers are actually coming from internal components like nodes, controllers, or any other proxies. And basically, the protobufs are introduced actually to address some scalability issues that some cluster can reach a very big amount of nodes, and actually there are multiple issues with the JSON because there are a lot of garbage objects, garbage collected during the serialization and deserialization on API server side, which also increase the CPU and memory usage of the API servers. Yeah, so basically, protobufs, they're binary formats and they're much more faster and effective. So basically, I want to have a small demo. Here I have my Garden API server, and I check out a branch which does not support still the protobufs. So I'll just start my API server. I also have a dummy main, which basically setups a client and sets the only accepted content type to Protobuf. So let's run this main command. Yeah, so the issue here that we face that is our API object, API resource does not implement the Protobuf machine interface because, as I said, this is a branch that still does not support the protobufs. So let's check out a branch that supports them. And let's start our API server again. So let's get the shoots. Here in my example, I try to list all the shoots and print the shoot names. Okay, it's taking some time. Okay, the API server is started. I have exactly one shoot, and I expect to be able to list this shoot with my dummy command using the Protobuf content type. Yeah, basically that's it from my side. If you have any further questions, just wanted to share the update that Gardener also supports Protobuf definitions, and if there are some components or external clients that want to use this optimized content type, they're welcome to do that. That's from my side.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Configuring the Gardenlet to only use Protobuf from now shouldn't be that hard. If I see it correctly, it's just a flag on the config, right?
Yep, I think that also for Gardenlet, it should be externalized in the component config, right?
Mm-hmm.
However, there is one problem. The problem is that CRDs, for example, they don't support Protobuf. So when you talk to a custom resource, then you have to use JSON. Otherwise, it will fail.
Yeah, that's a nice point. That the Protobuf, that's one of the good parts of the API resources when we compare them to the CRDs. That only API resources can have Protobuf definitions, and CRDs cannot have. Yeah, basically that's with these improvements, we can also upgrade our Kubernetes versions for the Garden cluster to 1.16 and above. And yeah, we will follow up also with this issue reported. And basically, yeah, it's pretty important soon. And I hope it will be fixed soon, also in KK.
Any other questions? Okay, seems not to be the case. Then you're already at the end of the meeting. So goodbye, stay healthy, and see you next time. Bye.
Bye bye. Bye bye.